Hi, everybody. Welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graven. Our guest today is Erica Dhawan. She is a globally recognized leadership expert and keynote speaker. She helps organizations and leaders innovate faster and further together. She has a BS from the Wharton School, an MPA from Harvard Kennedy School, and an MBA from MIT Sloan, one of my alma maters. So before I tell you a little bit more about Erica, let me first off say thank you and welcome for being here.
It's great to be here, Mark.
I've had a chance to talk to an MIT Sloan professor, Jonathan Burns. I don't know if you took a class with him.
Years ago, I think I remember, but I often don't always remember what I learned in business school anymore.
Well, and maybe with the work that you've done and the books you're writing, maybe some of that moves well beyond what either of us learned, even at a great institution like MIT Sloan or the other amazing schools that you've been to.
Absolutely. I think so much of what we learned 5 or 10 years ago, I think has to be adapted for our times. So, as Mark, you've done with your podcast, learning is iterative now, and we have to adapt very quickly to the new changes of our world.
Yeah, and learning how to learn is a great skill, and great universities help tee you up for that, I would say for sure. We're going to talk later on about Erica's latest book. It's called Digital Body Language, How to Build Trust and Connection No Matter the Distance. So that is certainly not a topic that was being covered there 20 years ago. I mean, we had email and AOL Messenger. I'm dating myself. That was the digital realm at that point.
Absolutely. I mean, AOL Messenger I started using it when I was in high school, and it was like this new social cool thing. And I am close to Mark Zuckerberg's age. So Facebook was in my college years. But I think for most of us that could date ourselves to the 1980s or 1970s, we may not be used to using a lot of these tools as a child, but have definitely become adept in as an adult.
Hopefully adept. If not adept, gosh, we are having to use them a lot. So I'm really curious to pick your brain about that later on. So before we talk about that topic, and I'm sure it'll bring up mistakes that you've made or that you've seen others make. Here when we talk about a favorite mistake, with all the different things that you've done as an entrepreneur and different projects and initiatives and settings, I'm curious what your answer is to this question. What's your favorite mistake, Erica?
Well, my favorite mistake is, of course, one that I've learned a lot from, and we learn from all our mistakes. But I think this one really set me on an important path, which even helped drive my passion to write my new book. Recently, this is about 3 or 4 years ago, I hired a new intern to work with me. And he worked with me remotely. So he's based
Hmm.
in Dallas, and I was based in New York City. And we'll call him Jim for the sake of anonymity. But when we started our relationship, I thought things were going great. Jim was incredibly responsive. I would send him a work request. He would get it done within 24 hours. I would check in and say, does this sound good? And he would write quick to the point messages like, okay, or got it. I would have quick calls with him, all conference calls, not video calls years ago,
Yeah.
to make sure things were on track. And he would take notes and get on them within that week. And I felt like it was a fantastic working relationship. That was until 6 weeks in when I got on a call with him and I said, I know we're 6 weeks in. I think things are going great. How do you think things are going? And he finally said, I don't like this internship. I'm thinking about quitting today.
Oh.
And all of a sudden, I realized that what I thought was going very well for him was going abysmally terribly. What was actually happening was my brief to the point messages for Jim, who was a Gen Zer, very much a digital native, often lacked cues of how he was doing about his work. My quick THX period emails
Hmm.
made to him felt a bit disrespectful because I wasn't acknowledging the hours and hours he was spending on his work. I would take conference calls with him, but sometimes I would show up late. I would take other calls during that conference because my client called. And there were so many cases where I wasn't valuing Jim's time. I wasn't checking in with him to make sure he had all the tools he needed to get his work done. I wasn't showing appreciation and respect. And so my favorite mistake was really the terrible ways that I treated Jim that allowed me to recognize how I needed to fix it. The first thing I did was I realized he wanted to really learn and grow. So we set up some learning goals for him. Every single week, we set aside 20 minutes on the phone to talk about things he wanted to learn about that were outside of his day-to-day work. Secondly, about showing my appreciation, letting him know where his work stood with me when he sent emails instead of sending those brief low context messages. And most importantly, on a regular basis, we started using Zoom years before it got popular, and we got on video calls, and it made a massive difference. So my favorite mistake was realizing that I didn't check in with Jim, and I will never forget. And I've always learned to don't assume people are okay. Check in with them. You never know what you can learn by simply asking.
And it's great that he spoke up, right? To help, rather than just quitting, or I don't know if this was, like, he might have ghosted you and you would have been wondering, okay, when you might have thought, oh, well, oh, Jim was a flake. When there was actually something underneath the surface, he gave you that gift of that feedback, if you will, right?
That's right. I mean, we live in a world with slow and no responses, or just if we get pissed off maybe from someone sending that rude email, we may never respond again. It can make or break relationships today. And so what I learned from that is I got a second chance.
Yeah.
And I took it, and we made the relationship better, and we still have a great relationship today. But the key underpinning of that is, in our changing world, whether we're face to face in hybrid settings or virtual, we have to remember that taking the time to value others means showing I hear you, I appreciate you, and I want to hear from you.
Mm-hmm. And you know, in this podcast, we reflect on mistakes, and we think about, you know, how did we learn it was a mistake, and what can we do different going forward. I mean, were you being a little too hard on yourself when you said your behavior was terrible? Was it blanket statement terrible, or does it just depend on needing to know the needs and the communication style of the different people that you're working with?
You know, I would say in that case, my behavior was blind. I was blind to some of the signals I was sending that were not engaging Jim, were not showing appreciation for his hard work. And one of the things I would say that made it terrible is I've been in that seat too. And I remember having my first job on Wall Street and at Lehman Brothers when I was 22 years old, and getting these terrible messages from my boss, like, we need to talk, ... or in all caps, call me now. And I remember feeling the anxiety rush through me and the pressure to perform, and having sleepless nights if I got, you know, this angry message from a manager. And I think at the end of the day, because I had been there too, I could have known better. And, you know, we all know empathy is about stepping into the shoes of another while remaining in your own shoes. But in today's world, I like to say empathy is reading messages carefully and writing clearly. And so what I've learned through this favorite mistake is that we have to almost upgrade those skills for our modern times. It's not just about being in the room with one another and having good eye contact. It's being careful and thoughtful in an entirely new way.
Yeah. When you think about that vague message that comes in on a Friday, I received one of those. You're making me think of something recently where one of the organizations I work with, one of the leaders sent a message that said basically like, we need to schedule time to talk next Monday. And the bad habit that I'm trying to break, the mistake that I'm trying to stop making, is my brain leaping to thinking somehow something awful is going to happen. And I tried to at least bring up the point of like, well, what's the meeting going to be about? And it turned out it was nothing really to worry about, but I might have fretted about it all weekend, which again could be my mistake, but at least I was able to clear that up.
I have another one for you, yeah. A boss that reviewed some materials from his team member. And to be sort of hip and cool, what he did was, as the boss, he wrote an email back saying, thanks for this let's talk on Monday, dot, 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 with 3 ellipses. And for this boss, he's a Gen Xer. The dot, dot, dot is like sort of casual, hang on, continue the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But this employee was a digital native who grew up in not only AOL IM like us, Mark, but many other tools. Facebook was there throughout middle school. And for digital natives, ellipses is actually the most passive aggressive punctuation mark. It can signal resentment for digital natives. So this team member thought the boss was being passive aggressive the entire weekend, and it ruined 4 days before they actually had a conversation. So it's just an example that helps us all remember that in today's world, body language hasn't disappeared, it's just transformed. And we have to be thoughtful of what signals we're sending, but also to assume good intent of others, as you said.